You ever stand in your own backyard, holding a cup of coffee, and suddenly realize you're the uninvited guest at a wedding happening on your own damn lawn? Yeah, that happened. I was in my pajama pants, half awake, staring at 5 people in matching polos driving stakes into the grass I'd spent 6 months turning into a living, breathing masterpiece, my sanctuary, my career, my therapy. And they were planning someone else's happily ever after on top of it, without even knocking on my door. Now let me back up a sec. I'm a landscape architect, the kind who obsesses over soil pH, who loses sleep if a Japanese maple isn't getting the right light. My yard wasn't just a yard. It was a showcase, native plantings, an eco-pond balanced down to the dragonfly. I'd poured everything into it, money, sweat, hours, and that morning, I watched it get erased in real time. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, maybe it was the caffeine hitting weird. But nope. A woman with a clipboard smiled like she was doing me a favor. "Oh, don't worry," she chirped. "Ashley's wedding will be beautiful. The HOA approved it weeks ago." She even pointed at my pond, and said it would be covered up because it didn't match the bride's color palette. I told her, politely at first, that there must be some mistake, this was private property. But then she dropped the name Marilyn Langford. That woman was the HOA president, and she was more feared than termites around here. 2 months earlier, she fined me for planting milkweed because apparently, supporting butterflies violates the neighborhood aesthetic. So I called her, thinking maybe she'd realize this was an honest mix-up. Nope. Marilyn picked up the phone like she'd been waiting for me. "Jake," she said, syrupy sweet. "You should have read the agreement more carefully. Section 14 allows us to use properties for community purposes. The board voted you're hosting the wedding." Section 14. Huh? That clause only applies to shared community areas, not private backyards. I told her that. She just laughed and said, "We wouldn't want to make this harder than it needs to be, would we?" That's when I knew this wasn't ignorance. This was control. Later that day, Ashley herself showed up. Picture a bridal Pinterest board come to life, designer dress, giant sunglasses, the kind of person who uses rustic chic unironically. She walked into my yard like she'd already bought it, pointing at plants, criticizing colors, telling me which trees were in the way of her photo backdrop. And behind her was Marilyn, acting like this was her show, and I was just lucky to be in the credits. I tried to stay civil. I really did. But when Ashley said she wanted to replace my native wildflowers with roses because they're prettier for the gram, I almost lost it. And then the cherry on top, I got an email notification. A wedding site had gone live with photos of my garden. The caption read, "Venue generously provided by the Willow Glen HOA." I went inside, shaking, and stared at the framed picture of my dad on the wall. He used to say, "Design is about serving the people who respect the land, not the ones who just want to stand on it for a selfie." I made a decision right then and there. They wanted a venue? Fine. I'd show them what it looks like when a landscape fights back. I called Olivia Brand, a real estate attorney with the kind of voice that makes insurance companies nervous. She reviewed the HOA documents, the forged signature Marilyn had filed as proof of my approval, and just nodded. "We've got them," she said. "But if you want to stop this wedding in time, we'll need something faster than court." Enter Frank Dawson, demolition guy, ex-military, hates HOAs more than potholes. I showed him my redesign plans. Full garden renovation, eco-pond upgrade, restructured irrigation, sustainable materials. Everything legally covered under environmental restoration permits, which get this override temporary event permits like weddings. The plan was locked. At 5 a.m. on wedding morning, we'd tear it all down. What I didn't plan for was Ashley walking into my house 2 days before the wedding uninvited, again with her wedding planner and a bunch of her friends. They were moving my furniture for pre-wedding photos. My sketches, materials, years of work were shoved aside like clutter. I asked them calmly to leave. Ashley rolled her eyes and said, "Mom said it was fine." That night, Marilyn showed up, furious. "How dare you make my daughter feel unwelcome?" she hissed, like I was the villain. Then she threatened to report me to the American Society of Landscape Architects for unprofessional behavior. I almost laughed, but then she served me with a temporary restraining order filed by a judge she clearly had in her pocket. I wasn't allowed to touch my own garden for 30 days. But Olivia was already 3 steps ahead. She found out the judge had expedited the order based on fake safety concerns courtesy of a city official named Thompson, who, surprise, had a history of shady permits and bribe accusations. She filed a counter motion and found a backdoor route through the Environmental Safety Office. Within 24 hours, we had approval. The green light was back on. At 5 a.m., the convoy rolled in trucks, excavators, workers in black boots and yellow helmets. Frank walked up to my door, nodded, and said, "Let's reclaim your land." Within minutes, the wedding arch was gone, the rented chairs stacked on the sidewalk, and the concrete platform over my eco-pond smashed. And then Marilyn showed up. She screamed, called the cops, waved papers in everyone's faces. Ashley pulled up 10 minutes later still in her wedding dress. She looked around, took it all in, and then just broke. "You're ruining my life," she yelled. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The cops confirmed we had the permits. Olivia presented proof of forgery, bribery, and financial records showing Marilyn had been selling tickets to the wedding as some kind of garden showcase. She was making money off my work off my land and didn't think anyone would stop her. And then came the twist. Frank's lead guy, Steve, pulled me aside and said, "You know Marilyn? She's my ex." Turns out, he'd watched her pull this kind of scam before back when she was running her wedding business. Fake venues, inflated invoices, cash disappearing. She reinvented herself in the HOA world, same playbook, different audience. Marilyn was taken in for questioning that afternoon. Fraud, forgery, trespassing, HOA fund misappropriation, the works. Ashley, well, she just stood there in her dress, crying, mascara down her cheeks, surrounded by the ruins of a wedding that was never really hers to begin with. And me? I got to redesign the whole thing from the ground up. My garden, my vision, my rules. Neighbors who'd been too scared to speak up started knocking on my door, offering help, sharing their own stories. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Marilyn had tried to bulldoze, just the first one to bulldoze back. A week later, Ashley showed up again. No dress, no planner, just her. She said, "I never wanted that wedding. I just didn't know how to say no to her." And then she handed me something, a thumb drive with all the internal emails, records, receipts. Proof that helped dozens of families finally get justice. We held a new event a month later, not a wedding, but a community garden workshop. Kids planting seeds. Retirees talking soil. Neighbors laughing again. And Ashley? She enrolled in a landscape design course. I'm her mentor now. Weird, right? So yeah, if an HOA ever tries to hijack your backyard, remember this: you can fight back. Not just with paperwork, not just with lawyers, but with purpose, with people, with power. Now you tell me, was I right to tear it all down? Or did I go too far? Drop a comment. I want to hear what you think. You ever stand in your own backyard, holding a cup of coffee, and suddenly realize you're the uninvited guest at a wedding happening on your own damn lawn? Yeah, that happened. I was in my pajama pants, half awake, staring at 5 people in matching polos driving stakes into the grass I'd spent 6 months turning into a living, breathing masterpiece, my sanctuary, my career, my therapy. And they were planning someone else's happily ever after on top of it, without even knocking on my door. Now let me back up a sec. I'm a landscape architect, the kind who obsesses over soil pH, who loses sleep if a Japanese maple isn't getting the right light. My yard wasn't just a yard. It was a showcase, native plantings, an eco-pond balanced down to the dragonfly. I'd poured everything into it: money, sweat, hours, and that morning, I watched it get erased in real time. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe it was the caffeine hitting weird. But nope. A woman with a clipboard smiled like she was doing me a favor. "Oh, don't worry," she chirped. "Ashley's wedding will be beautiful. The HOA approved it weeks ago." She even pointed at my pond